Hey, this is Haley, and welcome to Bookshelf Bard. January is finally over, and let's breathe a sigh of relief because I felt like it was the longest month ever. But I read 15 books this month. I'm super proud of myself. That is probably a record. I've never read that many books in a month, but I discovered some of my new all-time favorites, and I'm very excited to share them with you today. So without further ado, let me introduce you to first on the list, Good Omens by Sir Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. I have never laughed as much as I laughed in this book. This follows the adventures of Aziraphale the angel and Crowley the demon from the Garden of Eden until the Antichrist becomes 10 or 11 years old. And it's such a tapestry of characters and wit. Of course, it's fiction. It includes a healthy dose of religious satire in there. And it's definitely on my Deserted Island book list, which is a list of a couple novels that I would take with me if I couldn't take anything else. So, Good Omens, must read, super funny, hilarious. Originally, I read this as an audiobook, and then I went back and read a little bit of it in print. I would recommend, as good as the voice acting was in the audiobook, I would recommend reading it in print because it flips really suddenly in between characters and settings. And so if you're not really paying close attention, you kind of find yourself in a whole new cast of characters in a whole new setting, and you have to backtrack mentally where you were in the audiobook. Definitely read it in print. I can't wait to reread it thoroughly. It's one of my all-time favorites. Well done, Mr. Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. I love this. So next on the list is a book that I had seen everywhere. I'd seen so many positive reviews about, and I was really interested to see if it would live up to the hype. And so I decided to give it a try, and it was Lovely War by Julie Berry. And I really thought it was kind of average. I didn't think it was anything like just phenomenal. And it may just be because I'm not a huge fan of romances. But it's got an interesting premise. It's World War I setting, but as if the Olympian gods were behind the scenes and they were witnessing the actions of these four main characters. I did think it introduced some really dynamic situations between the goddess Aphrodite and the god Hephaestus, which I've never seen anyone take that spin on their relationship before. So I did enjoy that point. And I also enjoyed the historical aspect of it, especially after the novel was completed. They included a really good chapter almost at the end about the Black American soldiers who weren't allowed to really fight for World War One, and at the end their amazing contributions to service and to their country. So I did enjoy getting a behind the scenes look at a part of history that I had no idea about. So those were really the two saving graces for this book, the historical aspect and then the ending, the dynamic between Hephaestus and Aphrodite. So it's okay, like 3.5 out of 5, and maybe if you like romances, you would like this a little bit better than I did. I did cry, so this book is on the Made Haley Cry list, but there's a lot of books and a lot of movies that also do that. So I can't say that's anything spectacular, as my husband can attest to. So I'd say it was good. It was okay. It was interesting, an interesting perspective I'm not used to seeing. So 3.5 out of 5. So next up is a romance that I actually did enjoy and became one of my favorites. One that I had seen reviewed everywhere, and it was fantastic. It lives up to the hype. I think it was one of the top books of 2020 and well-deserved. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. No surprise, I think it's amazing. This follows the life of Adeline LaRue, who was born in 1700s France, and she was supposed to be betrothed. They're married to this man, and she didn't want to have any responsibility. She wanted her freedom, and her freedom took the form of a deal with the devil. And as many people know, deals with the devil don't end well for those who make them. And so now that she has her freedom, Anytime she leaves a room, or anytime that a connection is broken with someone, whether a door be shut, whether they lose sight of one another, as soon as that presence is broken between her and someone else, they no longer remember her. And so if she leaves the room, she's forgotten, and any interaction they've ever had with her is forgotten. And so it follows, that type of curse 300 years into the present. And this twisted relationship she has with the darkness, or really it's Satan, it's Lucifer, and it's so fantastic. It's beautiful, and it explores that idea of the mark you leave on others, and whether you realize it or not, if it's important, if your memory lasts, if you have an impact on those around you. And it is one of my new favorite books, and surprising because it is a romance, but it's a dark, twisted romance. And at first I wanted to be really angry at the ending. I wanted to be upset. I was conflicted, but I realized it was the only possible way it could have ended. And if it ended up like a fairy tale ending, I probably would have been even more upset. So, well done, V.E. Schwab. Well done. Next up on the list is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. And this book took me December and January to read, and I labored over this book for 2 months, so I'm mentioning it in my January reads. It is, the size of it doesn't really describe how long this book is. The print is just extremely small. This is a 40-hour audiobook that I read, and it's actually beautifully written, especially for the time it was written, and then for it to translate so well to today's world. It's beautiful. It really depicts human nature and human interactions so wonderfully. The characters, you just get so frustrated with them. You get so attached to them. And at first I went into this novel thinking that it was about adultery. I thought it was, about a woman who goes through an affair. And boy, was I wrong. I have learned so much about Russian society and the class system. It was fantastic. It was a wonderful book. I can't say that it wasn't well done. It's obviously his greatest work for good reason, but I felt like I am now an expert on 19th century Russian farming. I think every one of Lievin's soliloquies were about farming. And if only for that reason, I would take this to my deserted island book list, because I feel like I would have that land cultivated and exporting goods before you could say Ivanovich. And yes, my daughter thought that was a curse word the first time she heard me say that. But this book, all farming fetishes aside, it was beautiful. I felt cultured after I read this book. It was a long read, but well worth it. Next up on the list is a book that I'm so surprised I have not read yet, but 1984 by George Orwell. And what a more perfect time to be reading this novel. But I was pleasantly surprised at how sensual this book and how much a romance actually played a part in it. And it's not that it's like a romance book, but I didn't realize that it contained one. And there were so many original creative concepts within this book. This follows Wilson, and he works at the Ministry of Truth, and it goes through how they use propaganda to control the masses, and the terms coined in this book and the phrases, the creative phrases that Orwell used. I mean, you've heard a couple of them, like Big Brother is watching you, war is peace, and it's just amazing how he created this world so intricate and so poignant in its themes and elements that are relevant today. I think if more people read dystopias, the world would be a better place. But I'm surprised I haven't gotten around to reading this. Solid 5 stars out of 5. The only negative thing I have to say about it is towards the end of the book, I feel like the climax could have been like the ending to the book. I don't think that it needed that last little section over just descriptive elements of the book. I think that the last action climax, if he would have cut it off then at that point, it would have been much more powerful. But it was good. It was fantastic. 5 out of 5, Mr. Orwell. 5 out of 5. One of the first books I've read in January. It is The Librarian of Auschwitz by Antonio Iturbe, and it got some really positive reviews, and it was okay. I felt like maybe because it was translated, it was a little choppier in the beginning. I felt like, honestly, as I read more, the translation was a little bit smoother, and maybe just because the story picked up a little bit more, but it ended up being pretty good. This follows the story of Dita Kraus, who is a prisoner within the propaganda camp in Auschwitz, and it's terrifying and heart-wrenching. It did make me cry towards the end. The author actually interviewed real-life Dita Kraus. So, some of it is fiction, but a lot of it is history, and you get to hear her firsthand account of interactions with Joseph Mengele, the angel of death of Auschwitz. And you get to see the inner workings of the camp and how they use propaganda to keep the charade up as long as they could, and the horrors that were inflicted upon the Jewish prisoners within the camp. Like I said, I felt like the more the story went on, the more involved you get into it, and the smoother the language becomes. I think it was originally translated from Spanish. I want to say Spanish. And it's pretty good. I give it like a 4 out of 5 stars. The historical aspect of it is the most interesting. But yeah, Librarian of Auschwitz, 4 out of 5. Next is a series that I had already read when they first came out. I believe they came out in 2006, or the first one did. And they've held a special place in my heart all this time. I was a little bit worried that they wouldn't hold up to the test of time. But without further ado, Percy Jackson and the Olympians. We reread this series. Well, I reread them. It was my first time reading them to my daughter, who is in 4th grade, and we read them for homeschool this month, and as supplement to our history curriculum over ancient Greece and ancient Rome and mythology, and they held up. They were fantastic. I was able to enjoy the stories and characters all over again. I was able to pick out little pieces of mythology that Rick Riordan sprinkled throughout the books and appreciated them more as an adult. And I actually found in the last book a little page dog-eared, so I don't know if I actually finished this book the first time around, but it was fantastic, and I cried, if only because I had just finished reading The Song of Achilles, and Rick Riordan actually used his characters to recreate the death of Patroclus and Achilles, and it was so good. It was so good. The whole series held up. None of them disappointed, but Percy and the Olympians will always have a special place in my heart, as I think many of my peers, and hopefully they'll still remain a top read in young adult, because I think they're worth it. I think that they're wonderfully created. And he actually has quite a few more series with Norse mythology, Egyptian mythology, and I'm really excited to traverse those worlds in the future. The last read of the month for homeschool that we did was Snow and Rose by Emily Winfield Martin, and she actually authored and illustrated this book, and it was beautiful. The illustrations throughout, I believe they're watercolor, but they were just so stunning. We really enjoyed it. It was a quick read. It is a retelling of the Grimm's tale of Snow White and Rose Red. It was touching, and I was able to introduce her in a more captivating version of Grimm's fairy tales, especially with the little illustrations interspersed throughout. It was just gorgeous. She really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed getting a new perspective and a new take. I would say it was like a 4.5 out of 5 for sure. Yeah. Snow and Rose by Emily Winfield Martin. Quick read and well worth it. I saved the best for last. The Arc of a Scythe trilogy. I cannot rave about this series enough. It's one of the top selling in young adult fiction, and I hate that it is classified into young adult because it's so powerful, and I feel like people brush off that category just because it's young adult. But the Arc of a Scythe trilogy by Neal Shusterman, and special shout out to, I believe the name is Kevin Tong, who did the front cover illustrations. And it was actually a huge reason why I picked up this series in the first place, because just look at how they're stunningly made. But the Arc of a Scythe trilogy follows this age called the post-mortal age, where death, illness, disease is no longer a reality we have to face. And so death is given to the job of the Scythes, and it's a sect of people who professionally deal out death. The main characters are Rowan and Citra, who are two youths chosen to become Scythes. They're apprentices. And at the end, they must either duel one another for the position. One has to die by the other's hand, and one is going to become a Scythe. And so it follows their journey under their mentors. Scythe Faraday, who's the good and proud Faraday, the good and fair Faraday, as the name implies. And then Scythe Goddard, who is the contrast, the antagonist to Scythe Faraday. And the characters are extremely vivid. The world that Shusterman creates is intricate and original. I cannot rave about this series enough. And I'm not going to spoil with the ending of the first one. I don't want to give you a heads up to what might happen in the second and third, but each one is better than the last. I was not disappointed. I was worried that it wouldn't have a fitting ending. And actually, towards the end of the third book, I was almost towards the end. I had that much left. And I was so worried that it wasn't going to be wrapped up well. Because a lot had to happen before the finale, but Shusterman did such a good job, and I don't believe he has any more plans to continue this universe, but he left it open where, if he wanted to say something else about it, if he wanted to create another novel, he could. I wouldn't be mad if he didn't. He had a nice, clean, round ending to the series. It was so well done, and they will forever hold a special place in my heart. I probably will reread them. I definitely will reread them with my daughter when she gets older, old enough to appreciate them. But they were fantastic, stunning works. And spread throughout each chapter, you get to see journal entries between the Scythes, or the benevolent AI who actually oversees humanity now that politicians are gone, the old world order is erased. And that was actually refreshing. You had a benevolent AI instead of the usual, evil one who turns against humanity. But, and her name is the Thunderhead. So she is the AI that oversees humanity's management. All the characters were tremendously and beautifully characterized. So I cannot recommend this series enough. If you read one from everything that I've presented today, definitely pick up this first one because you will not stop reading. I hope you've enjoyed all that I've had to say, and I can't believe that I read 15 books this month. So thank you so much for tuning in. I will see you next week.